Hello friends, my name is JJ, and today we are going to talk about school supplies. Do you remember how much fun it was to go shopping for this stuff back in the day? Going to Walmart or wherever and having your mother let you pick out all of these fresh, shiny new pencils and pens and notebooks and all the rest. A lot of us stay fascinated with this kind of stuff for the rest of our adult lives and continue to get a big thrill out of buying it, though at some point we tend to describe it using the more grown-up name, stationery. So here is a drawing I made of what I consider to be the big 7 stationery objects in American culture, based on the sorts of things that I think you will see most frequently depicted in school or office themed posters and cards and toys and cakes and all that. And I thought today we would look at where these 7 specific forms of school supplies came from, why they've come to look like this, and whether they tell us anything interesting about the evolution of American culture. So in the course of making many videos on American cultural objects, I am often struck by how many things originated in America itself. This is much less the case with school supplies, however, which tend to be ideas that were imported from Europe, fully formed, with Americans only occasionally making minor adjustments later on. Even today, a lot of the world's biggest stationery companies remain European. All right, so with that Eurocentric throat clearing out of the way, let us begin by talking about the object that is perhaps the purest essence of stationery: paper. For most of their history, Europeans did their writing on all sorts of things: stone, wood, wax, and eventually parchment, which is basically dried animal skin. You could skin a sheep and get maybe 7 sheets of parchment out of him, which made primitive books extraordinarily expensive and time-consuming to make, but luckily no one could read back then, so it was a bit of a moot point. According to this book, Paper, Paging Through History by Mark Kurlansky, the technology of making paper, which was a kind of synthetic parchment made out of dried cotton mush, was first picked up by the Italians from their Arab neighbors sometime in the 1200s. The city of Fabriano likes to take credit for inventing European-style paper, and the Fabriano Corporation, founded in 1264, remains a popular brand of art paper to this day. By the mid-1400s, paper making was a well-established industry in all of the big cities of Europe, which was good because this was around the same time that Gutenberg invented the printing press, which really drove up the demand for paper. It's common to frame the emergence of the printing press as representing the moment in which Europe started to become a much more literary society, and eventually the world's intellectual capital. But the author says that the mainstreaming of paper-making technology mattered just as much. Many centuries later, in the mid-19th century, some German inventors had been experimenting with a new technology to make a cheaper sort of paper out of pulp made from wood. In the 1860s, a German immigrant living in Massachusetts named Albrecht P. Hagenstecker imported some of this tech to America, and a new industry was born. Since America was so full of trees, Albrecht was able to establish a bunch of highly profitable wood paper factories all across this continent, founding the company now known as International Paper and displacing Europe as the world's paper-producing superpower. His entrepreneurship would prove a particular boon to those of us here in the Pacific Northwest, which developed a hugely profitable paper industry during the late 19th century, thanks to all of the fir trees that grow to such massive heights in our rainy climate. Lines on paper were originally drawn by hand, and this is something they used to teach kids to do at school. I actually remember being taught to do this in school myself. I don't know if they're still doing that or if I'm just old. But paper with blue lines already printed on it has been available for sale as a commercial product for nearly 200 years. In the 1840s, a guy from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, named William O. Hickok, invented the modern version of what's known as a paper ruling machine, which could draw uniformly spaced lines on commercially produced paper. The Smithsonian says that his contraption established the principles of all ruling machines to come, which is certainly more than any of us have done with our lives. Wood pencils are basically just the modern version of an ancient tool that's been around forever, known as a chalk holder. You'd get a small hunk of some kind of rock that was soft enough to draw with, and then you'd put the piece into the end of some long, thin stick of wood or metal in order to have better control and keep your hands clean. All of your favorite Renaissance artists drew with these things. Lead is a mineral that Europe has a lot of, and because it was soft without being crumbly, it emerged as a popular type of rock to use in these proto-pencils. So much so, in fact, that you may have noticed that we still call what's in pencils lead to this day. But lead is ultimately not soft enough to make particularly dark lines, meaning that one of the most important breakthroughs in pencil history came in the mid-16th century when a giant deposit of the mineral graphite was discovered in northern England. And the English soon realized that graphite made for much better pencil lead than lead itself. According to this book, The Pencil, A History of Design and Circumstance by Henry Petrowski, the present form of the pencil dates back to the end of the 17th century, which is when we have the earliest records of people selling sticks of wood with sticks of graphite encased inside, though we don't know for sure where or when the idea was invented. The English town of Keswick, which is close to the big graphite mine, claims to be the birthplace of the modern pencil, but it's possible that the Germans actually came up with it first. In any case, because England had access to a giant graphite mine, they became the leaders of commercial pencil making in 18th century Europe, and indeed actively tried to weaken the pencil industries of other countries by not selling graphite to them. In 1794, a French pencil maker named Nicolas Jacques Conti was annoyed by his lack of access to British graphite, so he started combining the small amounts of graphite he had with clay, and this actually wound up creating an even better, softer, darker form of pencil lead, which is still the kind we use today. As you might expect, the French are very proud of this story of outsmarting the British at their own game, and the modern day Conte Pencil Company now straight up claims to have invented the pencil on the basis of this. So take that, Keswick. Another big player in the European pencil scene was the Faber family in Germany. Once the patriarch died in 1839, the three Faber brothers all split off and formed rival pencil companies to compete with each other. In the mid-19th century, the firm run by the eldest Faber brother came up with a system of sorting pencils into 16 different grades of hardness based on the specific graphite to clay ratio of the lead. So the softest grades would be B, and then HB, which is moderate, to H and F grades, which are super hard. Nobody really knows what the letters mean, in case you were wondering. One of the other Faber brothers immigrated to New York, where he sold his pencils with a simpler rating system based on numbers alone, and only 4 of them. And this family feud is why Europeans and Americans use different pencil rating systems to this day. Now, once pencils started being mass-produced, it became common to paint them various colors to make them look pretty and feel nicer to hold, but it's not really clear why yellow emerged as the standard color. There is a Czech company called Koh-i-Noor that likes to take credit for inventing the yellow pencil because they introduced a very popular brand of luxury pencil in 1890 that was colored yellow. And because it was so popular, other pencil companies soon started selling yellow pencils of their own to capitalize on this association between yellow and quality, which is the sort of thing you see a lot in the business world. A company does something unique yet untrademarkable, and soon after the market gets flooded with generic copycat versions. But why Koh-i-Noor itself went with yellow isn't really well known. Here is the main theory. Like many European pencil companies of the time, Koh-i-Noor was getting its graphite from mines in Siberia, with this fact being marketed as something that made their pencils better. And since yellow was supposedly a color associated with the exotic Far East, painting Koh-i-Noor pencils that color made them seem like objects from the glamorous Orient, which I guess you could also see from the fact that the company called itself Koh-i-Noor after the famous Indian diamond. Anyway, talking of names, the word pencil itself has a somewhat interesting backstory. Pencil originates from the Latin word peniculus, meaning little penis. But that's less weird than it sounds because in Latin, penis also means tail, and for much of history, pencil was also used to refer to small, thin paintbrushes, and only later started to evolve into a more generic term for any sort of writing or drawing tool. Small paintbrush still appears as the primary definition for pencil in a lot of dictionaries, even today. So in that sense, the little tail meaning of little penis makes perfect sense. Hello friends, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to talk about something quickly. I really like making videos for you guys, particularly cultural history ones like this one. I always get a lot of positive feedback, but I also know that these kinds of videos are not necessarily the types that have a broad enough appeal to get gigantic views. And unfortunately, gigantic views tend to be the name of the game here on YouTube. So if you have enjoyed my videos in the past and are enjoying this one, I would just ask you to consider making a donation to my Patreon page. Channels that have a more niche appeal, like mine, often make ample use of Patreon, and people are often telling me that I should lean into it more, so consider this me leaning into it. With greater Patreon funding, I could conceivably rely less on sponsorships and have a more stable base to finance the production of the videos themselves. Some of my videos are a lot more expensive to make than they might seem, just because I put so much effort into trying to always buy, you know, the best pictures and books and props and all the rest of it, rather than cheaping out. And I think that is one of the things that makes my videos feel different than some of the other educational content on YouTube. In the next few months, I have a lot of video ideas that I'm really excited to get cracking on, including more videos in my Lesser 30 series, some more iceberg videos, some more videos on the presidents, and a couple of videos on British culture that I'm actually going to be going to England next week, in part to do some research for. So if you have enjoyed my videos over the last decade and are interested in making a financial contribution, even if just temporarily, please consider becoming a Patreon donor. It would mean a lot to me and do a lot of good things for the future of this channel. Thank you so much for your time, and now back to school supplies. So these things are what we in the English-speaking world call crayons, which comes from the French word for pencil. And the linguistics of school supplies are so confusing, and we're not even at the worst of it yet. Colored pencils were introduced in the 1840s by a German guy called Johann Stadler of the Stadler Corporation. He had invented yet another new type of pencil lead, this time made out of chalk and wax. When mixed with pigment, the lead of these types of pencils could lay down beautiful, chalky, waxy lines of color, perfect for filling in pictures of Bluey or whatever. Fun fact, here in Canada, we call colored pencils pencil crayons, which is said to have originated from a confused reading of French-English bilingual packaging introduced to this country in the 1970s. Anyway, when Johann Stadler came up with the idea of colored pencils, he wasn't being that revolutionary. Artists had been using colored chalk for centuries, and there existed primitive crayons that were made of ink and wax that were used by industrial workers to write notes and numbers on boxes and barrels and things. In late 19th century New York, there was a popular company called Binney and Smith that sold stationery supplies to schools and businesses, including chalk for classrooms and black marking crayons for factories. And then one day, Binney and Smith were like, hey, what if we targeted our first market with our second product? And so in 1903, they started selling boxes of colored school crayons under a brand name that Mr. Binney's wife had dreamed up, Crayola. The product was a huge hit, and Crayola would proceed to become one of the great American brands of the 20th century, selling larger and larger boxes of crayons to increasingly spoiled American school children, and eventually all sorts of other gimmicky stationery for the kiddos as well. The English word pen feels like it should have something to do with the word pencil, but it doesn't. They evolved from two completely different Latin words meaning different things. Today we often think of pens as like an upgraded pencil, but it's easy to argue that pens actually came first. Long before anybody started putting chalk into pieces of wood, people were dipping sharpened sticks into dishes of primitive ink and scratching words onto wood or parchment. These were primitive dip pens, the most common form of pen for most of human history. You guys probably already know that for many centuries, Europeans thought that feathers made for the best dip pens. All your favorite ancient documents, from the Magna Carta to the Treaty of Westphalia, were written and signed with feathers. Though unlike in cartoons, they'd often shave off the feathery parts first and just use the shaft. Dip pens made of wood or ceramic with a nib made of brass or copper or gold started to go mainstream in the 1800s, but these were a luxury item for the elite. Common people just used pencils or chalk or nothing because they were probably illiterate. Mankind's earliest forms of ink were made of basically anything that could be turned into a dark liquid. Berries, bug guts, blood. But as time went on, more sophisticated chemical inks were developed when proto-chemists discovered that if you mixed various plant products and minerals together, you could create a watery, opaque substance with a brilliant black or blue color. For many centuries, Europeans favored a particular sort of black ink made from mixing iron sulfate with a type of acid contained in these tumorous growths found on the branches of oak trees. According to this Wired article, the most popular forms of modern ink, by contrast, are made through some mixture of synthetic dye, phenolic sol, ethanol, acrylamide, and oleic acid. So now you know. In 1884, yet another New Yorker called L.E. Waterman invented a contraption that he called the fountain pen. It was a type of hollow metal pen that you would fill up with ink that would then be released in appropriate quantity as you wrote. It was a remarkable feat of fluid engineering that Old Man Waterman had devised after much trial and error. Fountain pens would prove to be a must-have consumer good for much of the next half-century. But all that changed in the 1940s. An Argentine named Ladislao Biro had invented a revolutionary new ballpoint pen that never had to be refilled, used a ball bearing instead of a nib, and was vastly thinner, lighter, and cleaner than any type of pen that had ever come before. And because you could make the body of the pen out of cheap and abundant plastic, the hot new material of the day, these pens could be manufactured at a massive scale and sold at low prices. An American company called Reynolds started mass producing and selling pens based on Biro's design in 1945, but was soon overshadowed by the Bic Corporation of France, which in 1951 released an even better ballpoint pen, which proceeded to conquer the world. In 2021, the Bic Crystal celebrated its 70th anniversary, by which point the company claimed to have sold over 100 billion of these pens, literally enough for every human being who had ever lived. I never realized this until now, but their mascot, the little Bic man, he's supposed to have a ballpoint for a head. Okay, so this is one of the most brain-bending facts I've ever learned in the history of this channel. So, erasers started to become mainstream around the same time that mass-produced wooden pencils did, which is to say the mid-18th century. Credit for inventing them is often given to the famous English chemist Joseph Priestley, who, although perhaps better known for discovering oxygen, was also part of a new class of educated Europeans making ample use of wooden pencils to do their equations and stuff. Dr. Priestley was very interested in this new goop they had discovered inside of trees in the New World, the substance that we call rubber. And surprisingly enough, he found that it was very good for gently erasing graphite marks from paper, which had something to do with the way that the chemical makeup of rubber made it absorb graphite dust like a magnet. Now in England, to this day, they call erasers rubbers. And this always seemed normal enough to me. You know, you call something after what it's made of. But my mind was blown when I learned that the substance rubber wasn't actually called rubber until after erasers were invented. This is because the word rubber in English previously described a brush or a cloth that you would use to clean something, a thing that you would literally rub on something else. So a pencil eraser was seen as a kind of rubber. You following me? Since erasers were the first mainstream use of the substance rubber in England, it soon became mainstream to call the substance rubber as well, or sometimes Indian rubber, although the American Indians never actually used the substance for this purpose. Maybe none of this seems particularly wild to British people, but speaking from this side of the pond, I have to say that learning this fact has really put the whole meaning of rubber into a crazy new light. Like, this means that a rubber tree is literally an eraser tree, and rubber tires are eraser tires, and when we call a condom a rubber, we're literally calling it an eraser. Before erasers were invented, English speakers just described the substance rubber as being the gum of a type of New World tree. And in most other European languages, their word for eraser is just their word for gum, and this is usually the case for their word for rubber as well. So calling an eraser is a very distinctly American thing, and according to the Oxford English Dictionary, we only started using the term in the early 1800s. Crazy. Anyway, we used natural rubber to make erasers for a very long time, until the Japanese conquered all of the Europeans' rubber exporting colonies in Asia during World War II. Eraser exporting colonies. It sounds so bizarre now, and it was at that point that the West switched to making erasers out of synthetic latex and vinyl to artificial rubber alternatives dreamed up by ingenious American inventors. Putting erasers at the end of pencils is something that pencil designers had begun experimenting with in the 1850s, with the modern metal band system that we know today, first patented in 1891. By the son of the Faber brother who had immigrated to New York. This next generation Faber was also the one who came up with the idea of making erasers pink, although I've heard conflicting stories about why this is. The main theory seems to be that there was some ingredient, though people dispute what, that Faber Jr. was mixing with the rubber to make it stronger, that also made it turn pink, and then the distinctive color was just embraced as a marketing gimmick. Sometime in the early 20th century, the American Faber Corporation released a line of standalone erasers named the Pink Pearl, capitalizing on the fame of actual pink pearls, which were a common symbol of wealth and luxury at the time. And much like yellow pencils, pink erasers were so popular that after a while, people just assumed that this was the color that erasers were supposed to be. Though I notice this tends to be more of an American thing. In Europe and Asia, I feel like it's still pretty common to think of like a generic eraser as being white, often with one of those little paper jackets. A ruler is an essential tool for any civilization that makes things, since everyone from jewelers to architects have to be able to measure the exact sizes of the various pieces of whatever they're making. Here you can see a chunk of an ancient Egyptian ruler owned by the Met. For most of European history, skilled workers would just make their own rulers based on whatever increments of size they found useful. There didn't exist any unified system of measurement other than some vaguely defined traditional units that had been common since Roman times, like a foot's length or a thumb's width. But this was fine because, as any mathematician will tell you, an ability to make accurate calculations is more about just using a consistent system of measurement rather than any one particular system. This concept is actually where the term ruler comes from. Just as a rubber rubs things, a ruler provides you with a rule to use when measuring. As European states became more unified and expanded the flow of goods and information both within and outside of their borders, it became more necessary to come up with a unified measurement system. In 1795, the French came up with the metric system, and then in 1824, the British introduced what we now call the imperial system to standardize systems of universally usable units calibrated to the dimensions of a collection of sacred objects held by the national government. And it was from this point on that you started to see mass-produced wooden metric or imperial rulers sold as tools to both highly skilled manual laborers and prissy science nerd types. Indeed, the Europeans considered the creation of a standardized measurement system such a grand cultural achievement that you will often see portraits of 19th century big shots posing with rulers as a way of flexing how advanced their civilization was. The history of scissors isn't that thrilling. The simple machine of attaching two blades together with a bolt and using handles to squeeze them into making a controlled cut is an idea that has been around for at least 2,000 years and appears to have independently occurred to all sorts of different ancient societies in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. You can see here a pair of bronze scissors from ancient Rome held by the Science Museum in London. For most of human history, however, a metal instrument this delicate and precise would have mostly just been a very expensive tool of very skilled laborers like tailors, shoemakers, barbers, and surgeons. The idea that any random yahoo could have his own pair of scissors to cut coupons out of the Kmart catalog only became possible once steel started to be mass-produced in the mid-19th century, which saw an explosion of steel goods for ordinary household use. The comparable explosion of plastic products after World War II resulted in the iconic plastic-handled scissors that we all know and love today, designed to fit more comfortably into our pampered, delicate post-war hands. So there you have it, the 7 most beloved stationery products from the great American school supplies canon. There's probably a few I'm missing, so let me know in the comments what else you think should be in there, and let me know what canon of Americana you want to see me talk about next. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.